Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Navigating the Work-Life Balance. My name is Alexandra Schwartz. I'm an independent curator based here in New York, and I'm really delighted to be hosting this panel today on a topic that I think it's fair to say probably everyone in this room has thought about at one time or another. This panel actually came out of conversations with colleagues here at AAMC at the conference last year. And I got the sense, and I think other people did too, that there was some sense of urgency about this idea of work-life balance. Of course, curators aren't the only people who feel this urgency. I think it's a cultural, society-wide issue. And I think it's changed, though, in the last 10 years or so because of the digital age. We are all accessible all the time, unless we do something quite assertive to become not accessible all the time, through our phones, through email, text, social media, what have you. And then here in the United States, of course, there is a culture of emphasizing work, and time off, rest tends to be valued less. And I think that a lot of people would probably agree that many other cultures have this a little bit better figured out, although that may be changing. And it's a conversation that I've seen more and more in the media. Actually, this morning in the New York Times, I happened across an article with the tantalizing headline, "Why You Should Learn to Say No More Often." And it suggests, and I'm quoting here, "If you feel overcommitted, no is a small word that can remind you how much control you have over your own destiny." So more on that later. But I think there's some circumstances that are peculiar to curators that further complicate the work-life balance. There is a blurring of boundaries between work and social life with trustees, donors, artists, visitors. There are frequent work events at night and on weekends, and of course, visitors' leisure time and patrons' leisure time is our work time. So that gets rather complicated. Frequent travel, and the very practical need to go where the job is, which can mean moving and uprooting frequently. Work-life imbalance, I think, for many of us can be stressful and overwhelming. At the worst, it can make us unhappy, unhealthy, and it can even have an adverse effect on productivity, and Yao Fen is going to talk to us some about some really interesting research she's done on this. So I think we can all agree that we're incredibly fortunate to do what we love, and we've all worked very hard to be in this profession. But that doesn't mean that we're not entitled to work-life balance and to pay attention and care for our personal lives as well as our professional lives. There aren't a lot of mechanisms built into American workplaces that help ensure this, although this is changing a little bit. And for the individual, I think it can be difficult and confusing to set boundaries at work, and curators are in this somewhat unique position because of the social nature of our jobs. Of course, discussions of work-life balance often go hand in hand with discussions of balancing work and family, kids, especially for women. And we'll, of course, address that here. I myself am coming from that perspective. I decided to spend a few years working as an independent curator after my son was born so that I could have flexible hours and have more time with him. A complicated decision with many pros and cons, but I really want to emphasize that when we talk about issues of work-life balance, they affect everyone. In addition to universal and very healthy needs for a personal life, time to rest and recharge, to pursue non-professional interests, hobbies, political activism, which of course is on many people's minds right now, and so on. We need to make time for such important life matters as caring for sick loved ones or oneself, spending time with a partner, dating, etc. So the goal of this panel is to spark discussion about these issues and their effects on our professional and personal lives, to offer some insights, some advice, a few practical tips, and hopefully together have a conversation that is helpful and provides some kinds of solutions. I'm really delighted with our panel today. This is an issue that's important to all of us, that we've all had experience navigating. But I'd say that maybe the main point of this panel is to start a conversation in a public setting. in this professional conference. There tends to be a lot of anxiety about this topic and worry about asking for what one needs. And we'd like to talk about that and have a conversation. So we're going to start with about 5-minute statements from each of the panelists. We'll start with Yafen, and then Tobias, and then Nancy. Yafen.
Thank you so much, Alice. Thank you for inviting me to be here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. So when Alex wrote me and said, I think that works, inviting you to join this panel. I've always been, we went to graduate school together, and she says, remember you always had a lot of extracurricular activities. And that's true. I actually have way too many hobbies. And sometimes it's actually a struggle for me to get into work because I'm a compulsive weeder. And I do remember now, going back to graduate school, I loved cooking because it was, writing a paper would take so long. But, cooking, you would have something there in an hour. And then I realized that all my hobbies in some ways revolve around instant gratification. And I was like, oh, I wonder why that is. But last year, I picked up a new one when the intrepid Eve Straussman-Flanzer joined our department as our chair and as our curator of paintings. And she convinced me to go to this class, this box fit class. And I'd be like, no. She's like, it'll be great, come on. So we went. And so my latest thing is boxing, like with a punching, well, not even boxing, it's punching. It's a punching bag. And this punching bag is just great because it's sort of like, after a whole day trying to get some forms filled in, trying to get some wall painted, right? And you've got all these passive-aggressive colleagues, that punching bag is amazing, amazing. You just visualize, it's like all these people just morph. It's a great thing, and I just cannot, it's like, it's the best de-stressor. And, but I understand not all of us have that luxury to do those kinds of things, and we don't always want to get into our car and drive. And so short of that, I thought it'd be really fun to talk about strategies we can implement on our daily basis within the 8-hour work week to make those 8 hours manageable. Okay, so as it turns out, does this work? Yes. And as I was doing some sort of looking into this, I found out that there have been a lot of studies, or just thinking about, what is work-life balance? Like, why is it that we want it, apart from being sane and, retaining our sort of mental health? But apparently there are really strong scientific, there are studies that establish strong links between healthy work balance and productivity. And of course, you reach a certain age, and you're like, oh my goodness, it's like halfway through my life. What have I done? What am I going to do? And so it's about how do we make those 8 hours really productive? Well, as it turns out, you can really only be productive for 3 probably hours a day. And there are these people who've done these studies saying, oh, like the perfect formula is this 50-17. And I guess it was some study where it's about taking breaks, but apparently the perfect formula is 50-17. And of course, there are apps for this, but we can't all be so dogmatic and be like, okay, 52 minutes, and you jump up and you go walk around. But that 52-17 apparently comes from this thing called the Pomodoro Technique. And you have to show you all these graphics on the wall. I'm not supposed to turn around. Apparently, I think it affects the sound, which is very odd for me because I'm looking at images up there. But I thought these graphics, because we're all art historians, you would appreciate the range of graphics being used to explain this Pomodoro Technique, which is essentially that you're supposed to, set a task, give yourself 25 minutes to do it, and then you will hopefully have completed that task. You get up and you walk 5 minutes. And at the end of the day, you're supposed to be collecting tomatoes, collecting pomodoros. So I thought, well, it was fun, but maybe not the most practical. But I thought the bar graph at the bottom is actually really interesting because it really shows that within even 130 minutes, you can really only probably work I think it was, what was it, you need 35 minutes break. So really that you can only be productive for so many hours of the day. And so then I think that inspires us So to actually think more about how we're using our time, that we want to be more efficient with our time. And it actually, the reason I sort of was struck by this was because, and I think we probably all do this, we all get up and take breaks. Like this is the point of all these studies, is that you just really need to get up and you need to refresh your mind. And I didn't really realize that I was doing this every time I wanted to go up to the printer and get something from the printer, that I looked forward to it. I was like, oh wait, I want to go print this. So taking breaks, that's one thing we can definitely do, short breaks throughout the workday that can help us become, thinking more about how we don't need to be working more than our 8 hours when we can, obviously when we're not sort of meeting a tight deadline. And of course, there is the tried and true of taking a vacation, which everyone knows that, they're really important for recharging, rebooting, and as Alex said, where the United States, where Americans are notorious for not taking vacations, apparently we're the lowest, we apparently accrue 18 days a year, and most of us only use 16. And it's true, we think when we take a 2-week break, we're like, oh my gosh, that's so extravagant. And my Dutch colleagues will laugh at us and be like, oh, you Americans, you want to do everything 2 weeks, because you're going 3 weeks here or 3 weeks there. And so I wanted to show this because how could I not show this image of our former president, who, but short of taking breaks, now you will not, this is groundbreaking research. Apparently, when you are at your computer, or when you're on your phone looking at cats of Instagram, or when you are seeing how many of you saw this video? It's a great video, wasn't it? It was amazing. It was about how you can train cats, and they want food, and then they're clinging this bell, and they're really good about clinging the bell. Anyway, and you're like, wow, this is amazing, because you're just like, wow, first of all, how do they train cats to do this, and who has time? Who has time to videotape this? And of course, there is the phenomenon of the Cat Video Festival at Minneapolis that went so big that I think that they had to cancel it. Anyway, so apparently, looking at cute cat pictures, you're not actually wasting your employer's time, because there are studies that show that looking at adorable kittens or looking at any adorable pets help you reset your motor skills and make you more detail-oriented and attentive. And there's something about looking at these tender images, they elicit some kind of care, and I think it was something about a test where you had to drop things in a slot and not touch the edges. And apparently for those people who looked at pictures of cute kittens versus pictures of food like pizza, they did better. So, and again, I didn't realize that I was doing, and I'm sure we're all doing this, we just don't realize that this is actually healthy. Because I remember last year, all of a sudden my editor said, well, we need an introduction essay, and you have a month to do it. And I was like, oh my goodness, 17 pages. And that last January was also the year that Kitty Collector game came out, Neko Itsume. How many of you played it? Oh, poor showing. Anyway, it's like playing Pokemon Go. But I remember when I was writing that 17 pages, I was compulsively playing this game. I was like, oh, which the whole point is, for those of you who've not heard about this phenomenon, is that you're supposed to, lure cats to your house with different toys and different food, and you have to change the environment. And I was obsessed with this game. I wanted to collect all the kittens, you take photographs, beautiful animation, really simple graphics. And I remember I was obsessed with this. But then I realized part of it was I was dealing with the stress of writing, and it was like I couldn't get away. I had to do my hours. I had to get this paper in. And so it was like sort of ameliorating the pain was to see these pictures of cute kittens. Of course, not everyone has a preference for cute kittens. Some people could be like my colleague Jill Shaw, and you might like really cute bunnies. So, and I remember this, when she was feeling stressed the other day, this picture really made her day. So I just want to leave you on that note.
Hi, everyone. Just briefly to begin the discussion, I mean, I work at the Paris Art Museum in Miami, contemporary art chief curator there. And my husband and I adopted a little girl recently, or 15 months ago. We adopted her when she was just born, and you know, it's been a big life change, and what you were talking about in terms of, you know, there are many questions about becoming a parent and work-life balance in relationship to that. I think one of the challenges for me, particularly with you know, art or contemporary art, I'm involved in art because I was always attracted to how art and life mixed together, and one of the challenges as a parent, I think, is to start dividing that in a different way, and sort of the emotional pull of art. You know, art is kind of, you know, a cult, or you know, and to kind of to have these competing emotional attractions. You know, and I talk a lot to my artist friends about this, particularly women friends, you know, women artists, and a lot of them, you know, feel this frustration very much too. You know, it's sort of, they have their art baby that demands a lot of attention, and then they have their children who do as well. And I very much, you know, feel that push and pull. And some of the things what I'm trying to cultivate, you know, is that sort of more like a kind of to be able to turn off my curatorial brain. You know, I'm used to thinking about art all the time, and really almost as a sort of similar to meditation or something, to really start being more clear and focused in dividing when I'm at work or thinking about work, and when I'm at home thinking about home. Of course, that doesn't always work out, but trying to really be able to focus and to kind of switch channels in a particular way is something that I'm working on. I think in terms of fostering work-life balance, you know, I think it's, you know, of course, it's really important to talk about it, you know, to talk about it with your supervisors and directors and make it normal. And I think it is a challenge. I mean, there are many challenges. You know, in my case, to becoming a parent, I mean, one is financial, of course. It's extremely expensive. You know, my husband is at home, but he works from home. So, but you know, we spend a lot of money on childcare as well. Or often it's for us to see one another. For him to come to a museum event, we're paying a babysitter so that I can work, you know, so that we can be together. And that's, you know, it's kind of, it feels at odds or strange a lot of the time. But, you know, I mean, I think you know, what's underlying a lot of this pressure is, you know, we're in a very competitive field, you know, and so there's always that sense that you have to do everything, and you have to take on that extra project or that extra writing project. And it is that ability to start saying no, or think more strategically about what you say yes to, and making those choices. And that's hard to do, but I think, you know, that's part of that balance, is choosing the right projects at the right time, and saying no to things. I think, as I say, kind of how to cultivate the right work environment really comes from discussing and making, you know, discussing with your director. My director is a parent as well, and a very involved parent, and very supportive of you know, what I'm trying to do. But also, you know, it sounds, you know, like a cliche, but you also have to find your supportive community around either your family or professionally, that you can, you know, help each other out, you know, not just childcare wise, but also sort of mental health wise, or, you know, really have people to talk to about this. And yeah, and I think it's a challenge. I mean, for me, it was funny. I was coming to this conference, and I mentioned it at a senior staff meeting, and you know, one of my coworkers, a female coworker, said, "Oh, finally they're inviting men to these conversations." You know, and why is it always women that are bringing up these questions. And I think, because many of us are parents, but I think, one of the challenges for me as a gay man or in my relationship with my husband is kind of we really resist falling into roles, or we don't want, I'm the major breadwinner and he's at home, and we just really fight that, and that's another layer of challenge that we resist, or we're figuring it out, day by day, but to try to be as involved a parent as you want to be and still be, the primary provider. I think that's all I have to say. I think it is interesting when we get into specific, I have been in a very supportive environment for this, but sort of legally, I was allowed sort of a 30-day, leave for when my daughter was born. And my women colleagues can also get 30 more days due to disability, but that wasn't possible for me, and I worked it out. But I think these are interesting questions for male parents to fight for as well. So.
Good afternoon, I'm Nancy Spector, and I thought I would speak about my personal experience. I started my family quite late, actually, so I had my 2 daughters when I was in my 40s. So I was in a fairly advanced stage in my career, and I recognize in speaking about this that there's a certain amount of privilege in that I could afford childcare. In fact, I have the same nanny. My oldest daughter is now 17 years old, and she's been with us since my daughter Jules was 1 month old. But when my children were born, it was never we never really talked about these things at work, and it was almost an unwritten agreement that I would work all the time, but I would also take care of my children all the time. And I wouldn't necessarily say that that's a really successful formula, but it was kind of the way that I could do it, which meant that I was always on call and I was always present and I traveled, but at the same time I was fiercely protective of the time I needed to be with my children. So if I had to leave for a doctor's appointment or a school play or a parent-teacher conference, I did. And I'm not saying it was easy, because it was especially for women, I think, you're in a room and most of our directors are men. You have to make those excuses as why you're leaving, but I just made the deal with myself that I was going to be very open and honest about it. And I felt that it was a feminist gesture on my part, because families are as important as our careers. Now, that doesn't mean to say that I didn't have to give up things either. There's many trips I didn't take, many events I missed, shows I didn't see, etc. But now that I'm in a position of some administrative responsibility, I try to pay it forward. So for my staff, younger women and men who are starting families, I try to have the same system, essentially. I don't ask them to work all the time, but there's a given that if you have a family, and family is a very open-ended term for me. It can be a sick parent, it can be a sibling who needs help. It just means that you can blend your work with your life, because we're all professionals, and I cannot think of a person that I've worked with over the years who hasn't gotten their jobs done, because essentially we all love what we do, and it's a creative field. I do want to say, though, that I think it's a myth that there's this elusive balance between work and life, and if anyone tells you that they're doing well at both, they're probably lying. Because I inevitably feel that I'm failing at both. There's never enough time to do the deep dive into my research. There's never enough time to really sit and listen to my children. And I am constantly trying to find that balance. And I really don't know the answer to it. For me, and again, I'm speaking as a heterosexual woman in a supportive marriage with a person who has also a career that requires many, many hours and a lot of travel. I took on something that is called sociologically the second shift. So probably many of you know what that means. I work all day. I come home. I take care of dinner. I help with the homework. I remember when the doctor's appointments are. I run the household. I know that there's food in the refrigerator. Whatever it is, it's all in my head. And we never discuss that. And it's interesting that you brought up that you're having these conversations, and my relationship was completely equal until our children were born. And I fell into this role really by default, weirdly, some sort of genetic. And I've been reading this book, actually rereading, and I'd highly recommend it, by Bridget Schulte, called Overwhelm. I forget the subtitle. It's excellent. It's about time management and the gendered stereotypes that go along with it. And it talks a lot about how women in our culture are taught, this is a holdover from the 50s, that, and the Martha Stewart kind of sensibility of that, we have to be kind of perfect domestically and then work-wise, and we're the ones who have to care for our children because maternal attention is somehow more important. And we almost by nature do this. So we buy the Christmas presents and we plan the birthday parties. And I'm not saying this for everyone, and if you don't, good for you. But I do find in my conversations with my female friends that there is a certain proclivity for this. And I think that, again, is a hugely feminist issue. So, of course, we need legislative change. We need paid family leave. We need flex time. But we also have to change the mentality where men and women realize that child rearing is their job, and it should be equal, and that partnerships should truly be partnerships, 50-50, from the get-go. So I will leave it at that. It's my manifesto.
Thank you so much to all of you. Before we get into discussion, I wanted to share a little research that I did that I think can kind of become points of conversation or debate. I've done research on what specialists in work-life balance, be they counselors or social scientists or other people who really study this, have suggested as tips for achieving this elusive balance, which I would agree, Nancy, I think is kind of a myth. But the first of these is scheduling. The consensus seems to be that if you prioritize your time into chunks so that you say you think more creatively and write better in the morning. You do that in the morning, and then you answer emails that don't require as much thought in the afternoon. There's a lot of kind of discussion about scheduling being important to feeling as if you're in control, as if you kind of can determine what you're doing at one time a little better. Corollary of scheduling, try to separate work time and, quote, lifetime. So something I thought was interesting was the idea of identifying the biggest stress triggers in each area, your work and your personal life, and try to avoid or counteract them. So for example, for me, taking a work call when I'm at home with my son is very stressful because he's always trying to get my attention. So I try to schedule things as much as I can when he is in childcare or when I'm not at home. So this can be hard, and of course it requires a certain amount of confidence in setting boundaries and kind of having the ability to pinpoint what you need and trying to set that up. Back to the New York Times article that I mentioned about the importance of saying no, I thought there was some very interesting advice, which is, if you're worried that your no might seem threatening, don't be. Research from Columbia University found that our perceptions of our own assertiveness are often unreliable. In mock negotiations, people who thought they were adequately assertive or even over-assertive were seen by others as under-assertive. So if you feel confrontational, there's a good chance that the other party doesn't see you that way. I thought that was a very interesting piece of advice. A third point, acknowledge that you're human and ask for what you need. I think that this goes to what a lot of our panelists were saying, that everyone is human, everyone has their own personal lives, and usually can understand at one level or another what someone else is going through in this position. So for example, try to be open about dialing in for a meeting because you need to take your father to a doctor's appointment or you need to attend a school play. It lets supervisees, if you're a supervisor doing this, it lets your supervisees know that they can do this too. The more transparent leaders are about prioritizing health and life, the more the rest of the organization will respect and reflect this. We can't expect leaders, managers, and other people to support each other in these areas if leaders don't model it. The flip side of that, for people who are not in managerial positions, be honest with your supervisors and colleagues about what you need. We're all human, and often people are really willing to work with you. There was an article in Fortune magazine in which Ariana Huffington was quoted as saying, "Women should feel free to speak up about what it is that's important to them. If the team knows that, then they can arrange the schedule around conference calls, et cetera, accordingly. But women have been reluctant to say that because they feel they're going to be categorized as being on the mommy track." But I think this applies to everyone. You can be a serious, committed, ambitious professional and still prioritize your personal life. Another one, be flexible in your own expectations of yourself. Don't be too hard on yourself. Realize that the work-life balance changes, and you need to embrace this and admit it. Delegate and ask for help. For supervisors, great leaders surround themselves with people who are better at the things they can't do themselves. They champion others and allow them to grow that talent. Frequently ask yourself if you're doing only the things that you can do, and if you find that other people are better at certain things, give them the freedom to run with that, and that'll kind of create the symbiosis that's very helpful. On the flip side, if you're overwhelmed, ask your supervisor for help in finding solutions. And when I've been in managerial positions, I've really seen that as part of my job, to help the people I'm supervising do the best job they can. And then finally, keep in mind that the well-balanced pendulum swings depending on the work-life needs at a particular time. So people's lives change, their work lives change, their personal lives change, and there's no magic solution to figure all this out. So I hope we can talk about these different points at the conversation, during the conversation. In terms of policy-oriented solutions, we know a lot of these. It would be great if we had more vacation here in the US. It would be great if we had more paid family leave. There's not always a lot we can do about this on an individual level, and big changes take time, but it can happen. And recently there was an organized effort at a museum to get some paid parental leave, and it actually worked, and it kind of came from the ground up, and it actually made an institutional change. Also, there's been a lot of discussion in the media recently about flexible hours. This is a tech model. Google has been doing this for ages, and obviously it's working very well for them. This is an institutional matter in some cases, but it also can be done on a smaller scale, and I've been in situations in museums where it's unofficially embraced, that if you're getting your work done, you attend the meetings and events that you have to be at, you can have a fair amount of flexibility, and that's certainly something that I think it's useful to consider, a kind of micro solution. So as we get into the discussion, I have a single question for each of you, and then we'll open it up to the audience, and that is, based on your experience, what is the single most useful piece of advice that you would give curators about work-life balance as a supervisor and or as a supervisee, or based on your own personal experience? Big question. Yeah, in order is fine.
Well, I know, this is a hard one. I mean, I think that for what you were saying, flexible, something I didn't talk about, not just flexible hours, but maybe flexible work, like knowing that maybe you work really well. I know I work really well between 5 and 7. So there's no meetings, no phone calls, so I actually have sort of a staggered work schedule. But that doesn't work for everyone. But I do think something is so important to take away from all this is that, I mean, we are so committed to our jobs and we have such important responsibilities. But I think sometimes it's hard to let go and be like, it's going to be fine. Like, museums are going to be fine without us, or actually, our paintings conservator, give a case in point, actually no longer receives emails on her telephone. She took it off. And she just says that on the weekends, she does not want to check any email. And it is something I've been thinking about, so I should probably practice what I preach. But I think that the idea is that, if people need to find you, they're gonna find, they need to reach you, they'll find a way to reach you. But there is just something about saying that museum is just not going to, it's gonna be fine, and that you need to, because we're just much better employees when we're happier. So.
Yeah, I think I would follow up on some of the points that you were outlining. I think flexible work hours is very important, but more than that, to kind of just normalize within the environment as much as you can, asking for that time, as a manager or not, ask your supervisor for this time and get other people to do it too. So it just sort of becomes part of the culture of the environment that you're working in, and then it's just not weird. And then you can also start helping each other out in that sense, and it's not like someone's better than you because they're attending that event. They're doing it for you and you'll do it for them, that kind of, more collaborative nature. But as I say, it's a lot of competition, it's not, it doesn't always work that way, but if you can create that environment, you'll be healthier, and I think as a team, if you can develop a sort of that sense of teamwork around work-life balance, it'll actually happen more.
I think we live in a culture that does not value downtime, and I think that we confuse busyness with productivity. So that's my first piece of advice, is to really try to unpack that. I certainly need to. But also don't be motivated by guilt. I think that a lot of people who are dealing with their family issues, whether it's children or aging parents, there's this feeling that we're not doing enough and that we put that first. Certainly, I think for women, it's doing everything for the children before we then take the time we need either for our work or for ourselves. And that's a hard change, and that gets back to some of the kind of built-in gender divisions that I was speaking about before. So I think that try to understand your motivations, why you're really prompted to do something, and why the choices you make, we can begin to maybe carve out some changes.
Thank you, everyone. I think it would be great to open it up for questions. And of course, this is a topic that is very personal to many people, something that I think most of us feel quite strongly about. So I just wanted to preface the discussion as it would be great if we could keep the questions fairly broad and ones that can kind of apply to us as a community. So.
Can I be loud because I don't know how to turn on? Oh, it's on.
It's on now.
I'm Catherine Gunch. I'm at the MFA Boston. I think that for many of us, whether we have children or not, I had this problem just as much pre-children as I do now with a child. One of the reasons it's hard to push back and set boundaries is because we don't have a collective understanding of what is reasonable. And so I wanted to ask you as a panel if you have thoughts. I now have a personal goal of traveling less than 30 days a year, but I have not figured out what, and I don't do email on weekends because I'm not a heart surgeon. But I don't have a strong opinion about how many nights a week it's appropriate to be at the museum in a season. And I don't mean that as a parent, I mean that as a professional. What is a reasonable devotion of time to these more social aspects of the job? And so I'd like to ask the four of you, if you have a sense, how do you judge for yourself what's a useful, productive amount of time interacting with your donors and your colleagues over drinks as opposed to focusing on research, focusing on other work, or focusing on downtime in your family?
Anyone want to take that on?
Perennial question. I wish there were a formula.
I'm going to ask you this. How did you come up with the number of 30 days of travel?
I looked at the travel on my calendar from the previous year, and I thought about how much of that travel I genuinely thought was useful, and how much of it maybe wasn't super useful, and how much of it could have been condensed. And then for some reason, because I was raised in a middle-class household where women stay home when they have children, I also wanted to keep it under 10% of my year. I don't know if that was really meaningful to me for no real reason. But between the under 10% and the looking at my travel over the prior year and really reflecting how much of that travel was so necessary, how much of it advanced my research goals, how much advanced my acquisition goals, could I have done any of that in a faster amount of time, I got to 25 to 30 days were actually useful and meaningful. So now I use that as a benchmark moving forward. I can probably do most of what I want to get done in 25 to 30 days. Let me make it a goal. And it's been amazing to me how much I can say no to now with a really clear conscience, because I know that extra 2, 3, 4 days is probably not really going to get me farther on my path this year than it would have been if I'd stayed home.
I think that's phenomenal. And I probably never would have thought it that way. But I think it also depends, like when you have an exhibition, obviously you can't not do those tours in the evening. But I think it's also just about knowing yourself and knowing your limits and knowing when you're just going to strain. I mean, or that you're just going to crack if you actually say yes to another thing. And in my department, we were just talking about this other day, we constantly have, lectures coming through, we constantly have people, and then sometimes at the last minute, we're asked to go do something, and we've actually discussed, but like, okay, well, if you do this and we'll do the next, like I'll go do the next one. But I think it's also just knowing when you're just going to crack, and so I'm not so it really depends on what kind of project you're in. But I mean, I don't know, maybe 30 days is also a great number. I don't know. I mean, so I think it depends on what project that you're involved in, wouldn't you say? But it's a great question, though.
I think we were talking earlier, I think short trips become much better to deal with, and particularly with, family and things. Like a 3-day trip you can do anywhere in the world, and that becomes more of a priority to keep trips shorter. But, I don't know, for me, I mean, just more recently, if I'm working more than 2 weekends out of a month and plus several nights a weekend, that starts to wear on me. More than that starts to wear on me, but it comes and goes. I mean, there are certain cycles, and depending on the projects and things, but you have to kind of start to recognize those cycles and really know that you're going to go through a heavy period and make sure you do the, kind of balance it with a non-heavy period if you can afterwards. But, it depends on every program, yeah, and often, I'm always, it's that love of art thing. It's sort of like, I don't want to miss the lecture that my colleague is doing because I'm actually really interested. But to say, what, I can't, it's just not possible, so.
Is this on?
Okay.
Hi. My name is Anna, and I'm a curator in Philadelphia. And I wanted to ask a general question that I've sort of struggled with, also citing New York Times articles. There was an article recently about why there are not more women directors. And I've been working at PAFA for about 8 years, and every once in a while I get a phone call saying, hey, would you be interested in being a museum director somewhere? And I, in good conscience, say, I would, but I can't. I have a 3-year-old son, and I'm already going to enough parties and fundraising events and research. So then I look at that article in the New York Times and I say, well, yeah, there's all these amazingly qualified women who could be museum directors, who could be heads of departments, but maybe like me feel like they cannot be right now with young children. And should we feel that way? I mean, should we be trying to change the field so that we can pursue those higher level jobs? Or do we just say, no, we will stick where we're at for maybe, 10, 15 years when really we'd like to advance, challenge ourselves more professionally, but we choose not to because we want to take care of our families.
2 words. Sheryl Sandberg. Museum, I think when you get to the level of museum director, you probably can afford the kind of childcare and help that she has, and her writing on leaning in. Now, of course, it's a matter of choice. Maybe some people don't want that. I don't think it's just a matter of women turning down the jobs. I think it's that women are being passed over in many cases at major institutions with large budgets, and I think that was the point of the article. We've seen a lot of progress in museums across the country of smaller museums. There's more women in positions of power probably than ever before, but the real plum jobs are still male-dominated. So I think that's a cultural trend more than women's choice per se. That's my own, it's not a scientific, it's my own opinion on that.
I guess I would say, for me, it's been important not to get too bound up in what I feel like I should be doing. I mean, I'm someone who trained in feminist art history, and a lot of my projects have focused on art and feminism and women artists, and I would not have guessed that I would choose to be an independent curator and not remain on this very ambitious track. And I feel very lucky that the projects I've been able to do have been great, and I have family who help take care of my son, so I can afford to do it. But I had a lot of kind of feminist wrangling with myself about this decision, and feeling as if like, oh God, is this such a traditional gender role? What am I thinking? But the fact is, I have a supportive husband who is happy with whatever I chose to do. And I wanted to be with my son. Like, I had him late. I didn't know if I was going to have him. I really wanted to be there. And I have not found that it's had an adverse effect on the projects I've wanted to do. I'm doing really exciting projects that I've always wanted to do. So I guess I feel it's obviously an individual choice, but I have gotten very caught up in the past about like being a bad feminist and how that relates to my desire for family. And so they're kind of separate issues, but I guess if I were giving the one piece of advice, I would say try not to get too caught up in ideology and in what you feel you should want, and try to figure out what you do want and structure your life accordingly. Which doesn't really answer your question, but I do feel as if it goes in there.
Hi, my name is Georgiana. I'm from the Art Gallery of Ontario, and something about paying it forward, and it's not a question, it's more of a comment. When I'm invited to give talks about curatorial practice and what is a curator and what does a curator do, I've learned this actually from my former colleague, Michelle Jakes, who the first slide that I put up is my schedule. And on my schedule from my calendar, it includes the doctor's appointments and the plays and all those things that I do in addition to the many crazy things that you get to do in a day, jumping from one kind of thinking to another kind of thinking. And I've often thought about how we define professionalism. And from very early on, I insist in my bio that something about where I'm from, where I grew up, and the fact that I have children be included in my bio. And it's strange the responses I've had to either when I'm giving talks to the people that have invited me, whether they want to keep that last sentence in or not keep that last sentence in. And I said, you can edit everything else, but you have to keep that last sentence in. And I think that's about telling future generations of curators that these things matter and are important, and you can do all these things and insist on them.
Good afternoon. This is a very interesting subject. We're talking about family and children. My name is Furman Aquino. I work at the Children's Museum of the Arts in Soho on the West Side. By the way, our executive director happens to be a woman. President of our board also happens to be a woman. So if we're gender kind of friendly, it feels good. I just want to know, what can we do today to sort of like mobilize these subjects about balancing the work life and children? I remember years ago, it used to be bring your daughter to work day. It turned to bring your child to work day. Last week we had, it was considered Secretary's Day, now it's called Admin's Day. Can we just take those 2 days as museum workers and turn them into like a family day where we could bring our children, our husbands, and our wives to the museum?
Yes.
Who do we need to speak to? Like, do we have to write a petition?
You're a director.
Do we have to protest? Do we have to march? I don't see, maybe because I work in a children's museum and I'm around children all day. Like, I don't understand, like, what, not, taking anything away from what everyone said here, but why can't we just bring our families to our jobs and at least have at least one holiday, at least those 2 days?
I think probably many of us in this room, I certainly brought my children to work with me for the first year. I installed shows with them, strapped to me, to really make it very visible that that's part of who I am now. But I like that idea, and I think just as the question you ask, I do think that this is really a legislative issue ultimately about recognition from the government that families matter, and that leave should be paid for, there should be flex time, and that our lives are complicated. And in addition to bringing our families into the workplace, being allowed to, leave it for the amount of time one needs. So thank you for saying that, but I do, and the truth is that there are people lobbying for this. There are organizations and NGOs who are really trying to make a difference. I don't know with this administration in Washington, although there's a new book out, Women Who Work. I'm not plugging it, but
we talk about the work-life balance, and I'm curious, and this is a question for the entire panel, are there things from the work side of the scale, in that little tray over on this side of the fulcrum, that you enjoy so much that you made a conscious decision that they would become part of the life side of the scale, whether it's a trustee that you cherish so much that they've become part of your family, some aspect of work that has now become part of life permanently or even temporarily?
artists, for me, they become part of the family. We have a big open house Christmas to invite all the kind of larger circle of people we've worked with culturally, but we mix it with the parents of our kids' friends, and it's just one big mix-up. But for me, it's artists.
I would agree with that as well, but also, I work in Miami. I work in a very, a very Latin environment, and so a lot of, and part of that is family is more considered, but then you have your trustees wanting to meet my daughter and have brunch with my daughter, so it continues to get, it's nuanced, but I think there is that environment, there is a warmer environment in that sense, but I have to set those limits too. So I appreciate when the head of our board wants me to have brunch, but on Sunday morning with my daughter, but I have to say no, So, but it's tricky still.
Yeah, no, I would agree with Tobias that it is inevitable, especially in Detroit. It's a very small community, and other day, Eve and I ran into one of our board members on the plane here to New York. But at the end of the day, I think you still need to have those boundaries. Boundaries are so important, and I don't have kids. It's a choice that I made. But I still something we haven't really discussed is that for people who don't have kids, you know, that are you expected to pick up for those moments when people who have to go pick up kids, like, are you supposed to be always saying yes to those situations, right? But I think so it's about, again, it's sort of like what Alex started with, it's about learning to say no, and that, and I think there are also people who would say that, I mean, there are also questions like, can donors ever be your friends? Right? There's that kind of hidden elephant in the room. So there is that too. So anyway, so that's. But yes, I mean, and I think sort of why we're having this panel is because it's so fluid, that we're meant to be taking them on trips, that you're spending so much of your personal time with them, and you know, and now we have a system where we actually have to log in our hours. So let's say you were going to do that Sunday brunch, would you count that as work or not? And that we are, you know, because we're logging in our hours, we're being asked to monitor that we're not working too many hours. So.
Hi, I have a question that actually follows up on what you were saying a little bit there about how does one actually say no? Just because I think probably a lot of us can relate to being in sort of a workaholic environment, whether it's that your director's just constantly working and they set the bar, or your curatorial colleagues are constantly working. So if you have made that decision that you're going to be better about, you know, self-imposing boundaries and scheduling, how do you do that without looking bad to your colleagues who may perceive it in a way that looks like, why are you trying to do more work than the rest of us, you know, if it's such a kind of frenetic environment that we probably all work in?
I mean, recently on a project that I'm working on now, it's as an independent curator, so obviously it's different than being a staff member, but I've just been very open about the fact that I need warning to, say, talk to a journalist about the show. When I'm gonna be installing, I'm gonna be traveling to do it, and so I'm gonna be there for a day, which is a Friday, the first day of installation. I'm gonna come home for 2 days to be with my family and then go back to install the rest, and they haven't even asked any questions about needing to pay for me to come up twice. So I found that being transparent and just saying without apology and without, you know, being obnoxious about it, like, this is my schedule, people generally I find will work with you. You know, if you're the person doing the project, they need you to do it. They obviously wouldn't be working with you if they didn't think you were doing it well. If you're kind of upfront, I've found that people will usually work with you.
So I really appreciate the comment also for those in the room. I heard a significant and audible amen to those who do not have children, but who also feel that the demands of art curatorial work on them certainly goes beyond the 9-to-5 schedule, and that there is an expectation for that. I've had colleagues in different fields who've specifically felt targeted because they didn't have children, that they were the first to be asked for all of those late night events at institutions because they had, quote unquote, no excuse to say no. Which many people are laughing at also, but it's, I think, a larger and more systemic issue in a nonprofit culture. And I'm wondering if any of you have seen any productive models, any really strong internal cultures that other people at other museums can encourage their directors to reference or look at, that would be healthier, not just for family life balance, but in general for respecting and valuing curators' time, period.
I can't say that I've seen anything systematic, but speaking from my own experience over the years, what you say is incredibly valuable, and I think many people feel it, and from both sides of having children, not having children, and I think a consciousness about need for personal time is critical, and teamwork. So in all the years that I've been managing the curatorial department at various museums, and also thinking also about the registrar's department, because there's so much travel required there as well, and I know that the registrars experience this, 'cause they really have to be on the road. A recognition that everyone at some point is going to need time away, whether it's a sick parent or a property that they're closing on and need to be, whatever it is, and working together to share the responsibility. And so it's not just people with children and not children, but it's all of us who are dealing with illness and responsibility. And I think that if museum administrations could be systematic about that, and maybe sitting down with the various staffs and saying, okay, this is the year. These are the things we know have to happen. This many people going to the Venice Biennale, this many people traveling with exhibitions. What can we do to make it work? I'm not saying that exists right now, but it seems like a very valuable exercise that recognizes the kind of humanity of everybody who's working in an institution.
Yeah, I think from, a management point of view, I often find myself speaking to my staff saying like, hey, you maybe should take some time off. I mean, just because we've gone through a major installation and they're on to the next exhibition, registrars particularly, but also my team in general, and they start doing that to me as well, and I think that's a healthy environment. And also, from a managerial point of view, I never say no to anyone who asks for any time ever. It's about how do we figure this out? Like how do we make this happen? And you do, and it's possible. Even in the middle of an installation, or we're opening the museum and someone is going to give birth right that week, and you figure it out. You figure it out.
I think we all just want to work for you, Tobias.
No, I have a great boss.
I think getting back to your comment, something that I alluded to earlier about, we have this, I think there were some new labor laws that we thought were going to be enacted back in December. So I don't know how many of your institutions have sort of gone that route, but we were encouraged to log in our hours, just keep track of our hours. And I have to say, since we started doing that and having awareness, it's been interesting. Like I've seen emails on the weekends go down, and I've also, people be like, oh, I worked, 100 hours the past 2 weeks. I'm taking tomorrow off. I'm not going to come in. And so it's a very fraught system, but in terms of how it's being implemented, but keeping track of them, and then that there's actual record of it. You can say, well, I've actually worked this many hours. I can't go to another event after work. I just can't, and it's very legitimate. Yeah, it's museum-wide. I'm not advocating for it, but even just for yourself, logging in how many hours that has actually been very helpful. Be like, oh, I did, 10 hours or something, and then sort of after 2 weeks, sort of saying, oh, there's just, so in that, I think, so it's something that it's not discriminating. It's obviously very all-encompassing.
Hi, I think I've got the mic. Well, I did want to, I guess, ask a similar question, but now since it's been asked already about management, and that I do think that so much really is at that level. And, Nancy, when we started working together, you from, like, in the first conversation we had was, what is the work-life balance like? And that immediately set up the opportunity to have that as a dialogue. And I think that really is so important as managers, that we're really having that, opening that opportunity to talk about that and to establish those, almost sort of like ground rules in terms of working with teams and working with staff. And so I do think that that's really important. I did also want to make just a sort of funny comment that if you're ever looking for a laugh in terms of dealing with these kinds of, challenges of balance, if you've ever heard if you've heard of the life-changing magic of tidying up by Marie Kondo, Sarah Knight did a version of it that's hilarious. that is the life-changing magic of not giving a I won't say it because it's recorded, F-U-C-K. And we'll talk about like having a budget for those and what do you care about and what do you not, and sort of giving you the opportunity to figure out those ways to say no. So it's a funny book.
My name is Carrie Oliver Smith, and I work at the Harn Museum in Florida, University of Florida. And I wonder if part of the stress is how we divide our time at work. For instance, wouldn't it be nice to have research time? You know, a time where you could maybe not have to go to all the meetings or all the evening events, et cetera, and all weekends. What about sabbaticals? Or wouldn't that make you feel a little more restful? But maybe there's a way internally also to make time less stressful, as in for everyone. Just a thought.
No, I think the academic model is really one that we should be looking at, and sabbaticals are probably hugely beneficial. I just wanted to also respond to this notion of counting hours, which I can see the value of understanding how much you're working, but I just wanted to share that I think for many of us, so much of what we do is unquantifiable in terms of idea generation or contemplation, and much of that does have to happen during idle time. So it's when you're maybe walking your dog or brushing your teeth or taking whatever it is. How do you account for that? And if we have to start accounting for that, we're entering, I think, a really dangerous territory. I don't ever want to be asked how many hours I'm working or not working, because one week it might be 100, another week it might be 20, because I'm, you know, attending the school plays. And for me, that freedom is really, really important, but I do want to stress for people in the creative fields, you cannot be accountable that way. I mean, yes, you have to meet a deadline, but where the ideas come from. And that circles back to sabbatical, of course, which gives you time to, hopefully, you know, study and think and read and ponder.
I wanted to thank all of you. Nancy and I are probably more generationally similar generations, in the sense I was at the Met having my children. We leaned in, we didn't know it at the time, but at the MFA with the big 10-year building project. And so some of the tips I heard around here is I would say to young people, young women and men, definitely lean in, because I think as a department chair, you actually have more control over how you can help not only yourself, but your colleagues. So I wouldn't back off of that. And secondly, I think other strategies that really helped us as a group was that you really have to articulate to your director. I would say, I'm free for 2 nights this week during this campaign, which was a long campaign for $504 million. You can pick whatever nights, you know, and I think that's important, and being really laser focused on your travel. I mean, again, very, very basic kinds of strategies. We probably could all help each other write some strategies, but I think, Nancy, what you said about paying forward, now that in a different role, with 2 dependents now out of the house, young sons that were young at one point, I think really important to also articulate to a new director that we have at MFA how much time it takes to generate something, how many weekends, evening, holidays, which I can do now that I don't have dependents, but I want to be very clear how many of those it represents to get to a very short timeline, on deadline, on budget, on time. So I think you can help in all those ways, and I hope we can help all of you here in this room. If you have questions, please come at some of us who are further along the spectrum, and we'll hope to help.
I was wondering, since it is such a big issue for industry-wide, so to speak, does it make sense, or would it be possible to bring this actually to the AMD? It's the directors who set the tone and the climate of work at the institution. And we're talking about, well, what can I do in my place? What can you do in your place? But it's really, isn't it, I mean, don't we have some kind of liaison, and can we draft a resolution and ask the directors to think about that if they don't already do it? I mean, they, I'm sure, have the same issues actually.
I remember hearing there was something along these lines at AMD that I think the new museum, I think maybe they were presenting their new plan for family leave. But Judith, I remember we talked about that. Did you hear more about that?
No, I know Lisa Phillips was working on proposing that, but I know that the directors are having the same conversation.
Yeah.
Because it flows down.
Yeah, but I think it's a great idea.
I'm just going to make one comment that's been in the back of my mind since question number 1, I think, which is I would love it if when a recruiter calls and you explain a little bit about your personal life, instead of hanging up the phone, they would say, oh, well, things are getting more flexible these days. Let's try and work something out. Don't give up yet. That's all I would say is I would hope the understanding of the issues that we all face as parents are percolating upwards so that there are more opportunities and more flexibility.
I think it is a little. Maybe I'm a cockeyed optimist, but I feel as if the conversation is changing. I mean, do other people?
A little, yeah.
You think it's going backwards? Uh-oh, that's not good. But I think, I think the conversation we're having now is important, and I hope it continues at various institutions. We have about 3 more minutes, so we can probably take 1 or 2 more questions.
Hi, my name's Andrea Eaton. I'm with Diverse Works in Houston. And I was wondering if any of you could talk about discussions that you've had internally about artists who have young children or pregnant and the institutions making accommodations for them. Because I find that that's often left out of the discussion, but there are real needs that, for those of us working in contemporary, there are real needs by artists for support to continue showing and presenting their work.
I've paid for many assistants for artists who are their partners, for internal reasons, the assistant, but it's the life assistant, and it's the partner taking, and to have a child on during installation and have the other parent taking care of, and that's gone for scholars as well, or I've had scholars ask me, I can't go to your panel because, I need someone to, and so we've offered to, pay for that life partner to come as well. So that has come up a lot, and a lot of artists I know are men and women actually asking for that more. So it's more expensive, but it works out. Yeah.
1 more question? In the back.
Hi, do you have any recommendations for how to control the amount of meetings that we all get pulled into? I feel like sometimes I spend all of my days in meetings and then it's my after hours where I actually do my work.
I think that's a whole other session for next year. How not to have meetings.
There's one in the back.
1 more?
I just wanted to give a shout out to all the introverts in the audience.
All right, well, thank you so much to our panel. I hope we can continue the conversation at the reception, and I think we'd all be happy to have individual conversations. So thank you so much, everyone.